Would you be seated, please? You know, normally on the Christmas Eve service, I confine myself to 8:30 a.m. length sermons, which are like 7 to 10 minutes. But I hope I can be forgiven if I go on a little longer tonight. It's just under 20 minutes, so I hope you got the time. I thought of doing something tonight, and I'd like to say I know myself well enough that I know what was going to motivate this, but I don't. I was going to ask you to give me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how honest I'm allowed to be in this sermon. 1 being, just be a nice preacher. That's what we want. It's Christmas. We just want warm fuzzies. We don't want anything deep. Just give us warm fuzzies. That being number 1. 10 being like really honest, really truthful. But then I decided that I might not want to know the answer to that. And so I decided to do what I want to do. But as I was preparing, something that I'm just going to say, this isn't the sermon, but it is just to lead into it. I'm very much aware that there are people who are not here tonight who have been at Christmas Eve services as long as I've been in the parish. Ruth and Nick are facing some significant health issues, as are Russell and Angie. Russell and Angie were going to be here tonight, but you were going to pick them up. Russell fell. Yeah. So he's not here tonight. And another person, probably not known to many of you, Rolly Greenbank. He passed away a short time ago. If ever there was a man ready to go, he was ready. He was prepared. Lovely man. And the story there is he used to live in Huntington, Normstown, and when he could no longer run his farm, his daughter was running Sunrise on Elm, manager of Sunrise on Elm, and so that's where he was going to be resident. And so he wanted to find a church. And so he approached Brian Evans, the rector of the parish of Huntington, Normstown, and asked him about going to St. George's and all the rest of that. And Brian Evans said, "Oh, you don't want to go to St. George's." You know, I don't want to go to St. George's. No. You don't want to go to St. George's. You want to go to St. Mary's. You want to go to Lorne's church. You know. So Rolly called me up, and thus began a relationship. He got me to start services there, and the then program director, whose name was Andrea Batsis, was surprised that one phone call from Rolly Greenbank to a priest started services in the residence. She'd been trying for months to find a clergy person willing to come and do services, and had been turned down by everybody she'd spoken to, which frankly sucks. Anyway, so I miss Rolly. He was an absolutely lovely man, and we had many cups of coffee sitting in the gazebo at sunrise. But again, he worships with the saints. So that's some of what's in my heart as I begin my sermon tonight. The other thing, of course, is this being the last official Christmas Eve service I'm doing. You never know what's going to happen. Like what's happening to me, like I'm going on long-term disability, which means the insurance company is going to be paying a percentage of my salary. I'm not allowed to earn money, but aside from what the insurance company is paying, that's kind of fair, I guess. But I'm allowed to do whatever I feel capable of because of the nature of my disease. You know, if there was mental illness involved or incapacity in that way, I wouldn't be. But I'm allowed to do whatever I feel like doing. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens there. So of course, as I think of that, what will I feel like doing? There's 2 things, you know, that come to mind. One is my brain still functions. Now, please don't ask Mur after the service whether that's true, because she might have a different opinion. But they've never been able to measure anything wrong with my brain with any of the scoping and da-da. And it's my legs. You know, my legs just don't get me around. There's a lot of fatigue, you know. But who knows what's going to happen in the next little while? None of us ever do anyway. And I think for a lot of you sitting here tonight, 2016 has pointed out to you in your own lives and in the lives of some people that you know and love that anything can happen to anyone at any time. So as I think of the future and like what's in my future, well, this is going to remain the Tardy Family Church. I'm thinking of, over a quarter of a century as minister in this place. I'm thinking of some absolutely spectacular, glorious memories, and some memories that I could easily do without. And I'm going to tell you one of each tonight. Never said before in public. Well, one of them was. But I just want you to know. I just want you to know, because I want you to think. I want you to think about what it's all about, and what you're all about, and what faith is all about, and what church is for, what we're here for. I'm going to tell these two stories, and then I'm going to talk about Jesus. Well, a bit about me, and then about Jesus. Not that you would want to ever confuse the two. I'd been at St. Mary's a short period of time. And one of the reasons the selection committee brought me was because of the reputation I had in terms of things musical, in terms of things with youth. A third of the criteria of the selection committee's profile for the parish had to do with they wanted youth work in all its forms. And so they hired me, and Reginald Hollis, the then bishop, wanted me to come here. The selection committee were unanimous. I got a call, I think it was the night that I got home from the meeting with the selection committee, and then the next morning from the bishop that they wanted me. And I wasn't, to say I wasn't sure is not, I didn't want to leave where I was. Mascouche in Montreal North, we had started at virtually nothing, and we'd gotten to the point where we'd hired a second ordained staff person, paying all our bills, contributing to mission, one of the biggest youth groups in the diocese. We had just built a building in Mascouche. It had been a long time since there'd been a building built in the diocese. But I got to tell you, one of the things as we were building that building, in my gut, in my heart, in my soul, I knew that I was never, ever going to occupy the minister's office in that building. I just knew that. And it was a spiritual thing, whether your mind works like this spiritually or not. I knew that if I stayed long enough to actually occupy that building, it would be forever Lorne's church, or Lorne's building. I needed to go because the parish needed to move on. And so I got these calls, and Bishop Hollis was very firm that he wanted me here. And the selection committee were very flattering in some of the things they said about me, very nice. I asked Bishop Hollis if I could have time because I didn't want to come. I never saw myself as an upper middle class suburbia sort of guy. I always saw myself as like inner city. That's the way I am. That's the way I talk. That's the way I lived. So I was the reluctant one. But I prayed about it and talked about it, and Bishop Hollis gave me 48 hours to make up my mind. And so I decided to come here. And some of the things I learned right away in the parish were absolutely spectacularly wonderful. I met some just truly remarkable people. Sadly, most of them have left, either through death or through moving. Met wonderful, wonderful people. I'll just say one name without saying anything else about her. Pat Roberts. You know what Pat Roberts meant to me, some of you. But shortly into my tenure at St. Mary's, after the service one day, the then music director summoned me to my office. And in those days I smoked, and so I sat down at my chair, and he offered me a cigarette, and I accepted it. And he said to me, Lorne, he says, I'd like you to know this is my last Sunday. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yes. He says, I don't like what you're doing. It is your right to do it. You're in charge. But I can't work like this. The final straw for him was that Sunday I had played How Great Thou Art on guitar. And for him, that just went against everything he stood for as an Anglican. And so he felt it necessary to say that. I was a lot younger in those days and a lot more hairy. I was already used to, even though I'd only been a minister, a rector of a parish, and rector of St. Mary's for a short period of time, I was already used to emotional blackmail. And so what I was supposed to do was say, oh no, please, please, please don't resign, and to try and come to some accommodation. And that accommodation, there could be no accommodation. There could only have been capitulation. And St. Mary's needed to move from where it was. When you had some Sundays where the choir outnumbered the congregation, something's wrong. A while later, he did leave, by the way. A while later, the organist came to me, and he and I had played golf together. We'd gone out to eat together. Nice guy, very, very brilliant musician. And he said that he was going to leave too. I had taken him to a conference in Toronto. Graham Kendrick is a name familiar to many of you. And it was a conference led by Graham Kendrick. And I had said to him, I said, Jim, that's where I want to head in the parish. And Jim's a lovely guy. And he came to me and said, Lorne, I think what you're doing is right. And he was very positive and supportive. He says, but Lorne, it's just not me. Just the same thing, the same decision, but expressed two completely different ways. One in a way that was emotional blackmail, and another that was positive, constructive, and supportive, but still a parting of the ways. And that latter, folks, is the way Christians are supposed to behave. That's the way we're supposed to behave. We don't all have to agree. And I don't think we always should agree. I think there are things that should cause us to disagree. But within the context of that disagreement, the way we disagree, either you flee from good or you feel, I'll say it this way, the presence of the Spirit. And that might come in as warmth, as peace, as whatever. And I've known it all in this place. I've known it all in this place. And then the other story, those weren't two stories, that was really one story, A and B. What do you do for music then? What do you do? Well, you look around and you see what you got. And my philosophy and theology comes from two Greek words, theos and logos. And theos is God, and logos is words. So theology is words about God. So my philosophy, my thinking about words, and my theology, my thinking about God, leads me to say, who has the right heart, even if we don't know about the skills and talent? So there's this person that had come on board in kind of a crazy, confused way, and was all over the place, and kind of mature, kind of immature, but man, with a brain and with a dedicated heart. And so I think it was on a 3-month trial. Maybe I'm making up stories to make myself feel better about a stupid decision. I offered her a job temporarily as music director. And the first thing that she did was put together a choir. I think it was over 30 people, though I may be mistaken. And did a full 9 lessons in carols, Christmas Eve service. And of course, that was Marie. And apparently it's been a life sentence ever since. I was told by many people, strangely few in the parish, mostly colleagues, that I was making a mistake because I was backing myself into a corner. That if it worked out, I was stuck with something I may not want to be stuck with. But if it didn't work out and I had to replace her, I was going to look really, really, really bad. Well, I've always been foolish. So there you go. I think that was one of my least foolish moves, but anyway. And so that led St. Mary's into a completely different way of worshiping, of doing God. And it's been one of the most valuable things. But my point in saying this is, sometimes you got to confront stuff and deal with it before the new can arise. And I think a lot of the times in our lives we say, where is God in all this? Why is this happening? Why doesn't God just sort of, can't he just please give us a playbook so that we can get it right? But that's not the way God works, and that's not the way God's ever worked. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit next. Not for very long. One of the things that I'm being asked a lot by people, since my brain is still working, what are you going to do when you're no longer in charge of a parish and you're on long-term disability and not working for a living, just living off the fat of the land? And I'm concerned about my brain turning to a massive gelatinous goo and leaking out my ears, so I want to stimulate my brain. So I've been taking a course through Wesleyan University in the States, just finished. And because it's online, people taking the course are literally from all over the world. And the course is about how to change the world. And we looked at things like the environment, we looked at things like poverty, women's rights, stuff like that. And for me, a lot of this stuff has a practical application because of what I do for a living. But for us in North America, a lot of this stuff is really, really theoretical, and doesn't really kick us in the gut. But one of the guys taking the course, his name is Mukhtar. You don't have to remember it, there's no test. His name is Mukhtar. And Mukhtar lives in Indonesia. And he's an IDP. You know what an IDP is? Internally displaced person. So he lives in an internment camp because he's an internally displaced person. And as he would write his papers, we had to write 6 papers. As he would write his papers, I was talking from a theoretical point of view, and even the things that were less than theoretical weren't really hard. But the topics that I was dealing with from a mostly theoretical point of view, he deals with in everyday life. Like, women just shouldn't get raped as a matter of course, but they just do because men are allowed to do that where he is. And there was one thing that just blew me away, that one of the factories in the area just shoots all their chemicals and stuff right into the river. And a group of people tried to protest that. And so they got together and organized it and protested it because that was their water that they needed for their life. And the government destroyed their village. Just came in and just destroyed their village. And so the things that for us, even when we're the most sincere, for some people they are literally a matter of life and death. And so I was realizing that one of the things I want to do as I step out of officialdom and into another place is try to bring to mind, in whatever ways I can, that even in our society, in some very different ways, people have it really, really tough and go through a really, really hard time, and so often do it alone. And they need people to come along who have a message of hope and of light and of love and caring. And the message isn't just words, but it's in the way we live our lives and in the way we live our relationships. And that's where it gets to the gospel message. Tonight is about the warm side of Christmas, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, Man, there's nothing wrong with that. It is a nice story. It is a story that warms the heart, that God so loved the world, and the light coming into the world and all that. It is a good story, and it's good to have our hearts warmed by that. But we got to remember the rest of the story, that within a really short period of time, officialdom of Jesus' age decided that it was under threat, and so decided that every boy under the age of 2 needed to be killed. And if you doubt that that actually happened, there's records of that in non-Christian circles. That's what if you're trying to figure out whether something happened, you don't just look at people who are on your side, you look at what the others say. It happened. That these babies were killed. And while we're talking about like gold, frankincense, and myrrh at Christmas time, within a very short time, they would have needed that gold, because for a lot of years, Jesus and his parents were refugees. They weren't internally displaced persons. They were refugees in Egypt. And think of that connection too. Jewish refugees in Egypt during Jesus' time. And I'll just give you one word if you want to know what it was like, though in a different technological time. Think Aleppo. That's where Jesus was living. That's what was going on. And so, all the hope and all the glory and all the warmth and all the love and all the good feelings that we have around the Christmas story, and enjoy them. But it's got to be also with the realization that it isn't only about that. That takes place in the context of some really, really hard hurt. I keep being asked by people, I'm winding up by the way, I keep being asked by people, am I going to write my memoirs? Am I going to write a book? Am I going to, I think I am going to be writing a book at some, in fact, the next course I'm taking is a course from Yale about creative writing, and how to do it. I think it's not a great title, but it's just what I'm working on in my brain. I think the title of my book should be something like Faith When Life Really Sucks. I think that'd make a really good title and a really good book. Because, yes, God works in the good times. And God does work around when you're sitting around the campfire drinking a beer and it's one of those nice kumbaya moments. And I love those kumbaya moments. I really do. I'm enough of a hippie. But you also find God when life really sucks. He won't give you a roadmap. He won't give you a manual. He won't give you a game plan and say, well, when life sucks this much and you do that, then you will discover. No, you just got to live it and go through it. And walk with people who care for you and support you and can share their faith with you when your own is bottoming out. And then someday, you'll be able to share yours with them when theirs is bottoming out. Because something has happened that's just so hard that they just wonder whether they could put one foot in front of the other. I've learned a lot over the years. I have known spectacular experiences in ministry. And just as, Marie might say I spend too much time on Facebook, one of the good things I found about Facebook is I've reconnected with youth group members whose life I was a part of for a short period of time, 30, 35 years ago. And they say to me, remember when? Remember when? So, I've got a lot of that. And some of the remember whens are, remember when God did, Remember when we stepped out in faith not knowing what was going to happen. We could end up in Egypt as refugees or in an IDP camp or who knows where. But we stepped out in faith and something spectacular happened. A refugee family came over to Canada because of us, and then another one, and then there's all those foster children and all those people affected by Kiva and all those people who have been blessed by the relationships you've all had amongst each other. You step out in faith. And in the good times, and in the times when life really sucks, you find that by taking one step forward, you will find God. The light still shines. Now let's pray. God, thank you for this time together tonight. I know that there are people here who are going through a rough time or who have gone through a rough time recently. So I pray, God, for people who may just be at the end of their strength, end of their energy, surround them with your love, often expressed through other people. And God, cause each and every one of us here tonight to be open to being used by you to give someone a healing touch or a hug or a kiss or just to listen. Thank you that you do put it in our hearts to do good things. And God, tonight on this very special night, we pray for your world, a world that you love so much that you sent your Son to come into it. And now send us to be your light in a very broken world. Fill us with the joy and the love and the glory and the warmth and the food of the season. But God, remind us of the need to care for others as well. In Jesus' name, amen. And now we'll stand, and as we do Sunday by Sunday, and every time we get together, we'll share in exchanging the peace of